Hi everyone, we are live. So welcome everyone to Decolonising Futures, which is a series of events that Decolonising Economics are running, and today's event is Resourcing Reparations, Investing in Collective Healing. We like to say when we begin all of our events, because we're now doing so many online, welcome to our house. And before I get started, I want to go through a little bit of logistics because we've got bits of tech going on, and then I'm going to introduce the team. So firstly, we do have a transcription process that is being run by an AI called Otter. So, and Sophie, who is part of the team, is going to be supporting and sharing the links for that transcription. We're also going to try and do some live tweeting so that you can follow the conversation online. And the team are going to send the hashtags through in a second so you can follow that, plus all of the handles for the speakers, who I'll introduce shortly. If you have any issues, you drop off or you need to get in touch with us, just email us at info@decolonizingeconomics.org. You will have been asked for your consent as you came into the room that we are recording the event, and part of the reason for that is because we want to use some of the content in the future to develop a more accessible, creative piece around the conversation that we're going to have today. So if you're happy to, if you don't want to have your face videoed, or you want to change the name on the screen, feel free to do that. You don't have to sort of be fully recorded, and just listen in and enjoy the discussion. I've got about 5 minutes to just go through why we're here. But first, just wanted to say thank you to Noni, who's my organising partner. Noni and I are sort of the two halves of Decolonising Economics. There we go, that's our faces. And we are joined by our pals, Sophie and Ola, who long-time collaborators who've always been around supporting us, and without whom we've not where I was, but basically, we're a really small team, and as a result, we're quite scrappy. So this is all very ad hoc, and if you need any help, just put in the chat box, and hopefully we can make this event accessible for you. What else do I need to tell you? So Decolonising Futures is a series of lunchtime events, and we've been dreaming about these conversations for over a year and a half through doing our organising work with various racial justice organisers across the UK, and we've been collectively asking, what do we need to do to move away from the extractive economy and build something that will support racial justice? So part of the launch is this crowdfunder, where we're raising £10,000 to support our first programme called Investing in Black and People of Colour Cooperative Futures. We love co-ops. Might seem a little bit niche or left field, but we believe that the expansion of democratically owned workplaces, homes and services are pretty key to addressing the racial wealth gap. And this is part of our focus for the coming year. And cooperatives are a way in which Black and people of colour communities can be at the forefront of building the solidarity economy that is rooted in racial justice. I'm not going to go into that too much, but you can read much more on our beautiful new website and learn much more about our kind of theory and analysis behind that. And finally, a little bit about today's conversation. So DE's strategy is guided by this framework, which is developed by Movement Generation. It's a framework for just transition. It tells you a little bit about the words that we use about the extractive economy and what we want to move towards. And for decolonising economics, we've got 3 pathways in which we kind of apply our resources. We want to divest from whiteness, so deepen the analysis of our economic and financial systems, which are currently rooted in the colonial legacy of maintaining wealth in whiteness. Work alongside our partners and allies to shift the strategies and practice of the new economy movement in the UK to facilitate a solidarity economy. So that's in that kind of values filter section at the bottom. And then invest in the leadership of marginalised communities of colour who are organising towards community ownership of assets as a strategy for reparations that will help facilitate collective healing. And that's to kind of bring about the preconditions for the living economy. And for us to speak about reparations takes the conversation about racial justice basically for us beyond diversity and inclusion, and towards something that really considers issues of power within society that are reflected in where wealth and resources lie. And this conversation follows on from the first event that we had on racial hierarchies that looked into the nuances of the racial wealth gap between different racialized communities in the UK, so not just this kind of binary of black and white, reminding us that when we speak about wealth in whiteness, we're also referring to those communities of color who have been complicit in white dominant culture in order to access and accumulate wealth and power and resources. And I speak to that as someone who is part of a community that is highly complicit in maintaining wealth in whiteness. And yeah, we'll share some of the kind of insights in that conversation that we had last time later on social media. And when we originally began thinking about the questions for this session, we thought we could spend time uncovering the historic and ongoing forms of wealth extraction that are embedded in our economy. But it kind of dawned on us that that would be both repetitive, maybe a bit exhausting, and slightly intangible. So what we wanted to do instead was to spend some time really focusing on what reparations can offer us when we think about how to bring about strategic shifts in wealth and power through a range of interventions. And in order for us to create those conditions that are needed for collective healing that are traumatic and as a result of structural racism and other forms of inequality. So I don't want to go on much further. I want to introduce our speakers. I think that's the next slide, Amy. So the first speaker is Yvonne, our mate Yvonne up in Glasgow. Yvonne Blake describes herself as a lifelong advocate of social justice, collective responsibility, lifelong and life-wide learning, which she believes is fundamental in the transformative process of Black economic liberation and self-actualization. She is a community historian, a collective member of Unity Centre, where they provide practical support and solidarity for the migrant community, and co-founder of More, Migrants Organising for Rights and Employment, a migrant-led grassroots organisation campaigning for asylum-seeking people's rights to access employment, education, decent housing and dignity. Yvonne is also a cycle enthusiast, loves the outdoors, and has some really big and beautiful dreams, which I really can't wait for her to share with you. And is also one of my favourite people because she offers real talk really hard. So I'm expecting a lot of that today as well. Penny is a long-term friend of Decolonising Economics and just Nonny and I personally. She is director and organiser at the Racial Justice Network, which is based up in Yorkshire. Her work focuses on coloniality, social justice, racial equality and equity, and within marginalised communities. She has interests in migration, intersections, building power and movements. I mean, actually, none of this really gives enough of a picture of Penny's magic and wonder. So I'm going to let Penny kind of bring that herself. And then finally, we're just really honoured to have Esther here with us. And a quick kind of background on Esther. Most of you will recognise her name and know her as one of the leading thinkers on reparations, both in the UK and internationally. Esther describes herself as a Pan-Africanist, juror consultant and community advocate specialising in critical legal practice of law as resistance as an approach to social movement lawyering. She serves as a co-vice chair of the Pan-African Reparations. She serves as the co-vice chair of the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe, which has the familiar name of PARCO, and coordinates the Stop Manganese campaign, and is co-founder of Extinction Rebellion's International Solidarity Network. Okay, that's enough from me. I'm going to move forward with the first question. So maybe we can share this quote in the chat box if it's easier. But one of our guiding principles, both for this event, but also in the work that we do in our work at Decolonising Economics, is Adrienne Maree Brown's quote on the Black imagination. So I wanted to open our conversation by creating a space to imagine a just future for Black, Indigenous and people of colour communities. And I wanted to ask each of our speakers, maybe starting with Yvonne, what does equitable wealth or access to wealth mean to you in the community you organise with? And what can you imagine a world that is committed to reparations look and feel like? Give you a second to get the tablets getting in. So let's move to Penny, and Penny, the same question to you. What does equitable access to wealth mean to you in the community you organise with? And what can you imagine a world that has committed to reparations look and feel like?
Thank you, Gappy, and yeah, Nonny and everybody else has kind of helped to organize this, but also for the invite. Yeah, I was looking at the picture thinking, I know why there isn't a picture of me, but it's cool. Equitable wealth, for me as a starter, I asked myself, what do we mean by wealth? And for me, it's not the kind of capitalist sense of wealth where it's kind of material or kind of consumerist. For me, wealth means more around connection to nature, community, knowledge, relationships, humanity, and all those things that we kind of aren't always seen or considered to be wealth. But to come back to equitable wealth, because unfortunately we live in a capitalist system that values that and therefore reinforces or kind of reproduces in terms of the harms or the inequality and the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. For me, equitable access would be something to do with rebalancing the inequalities there for a reason, whether it's from the exploitation, extraction that we know of via colonialism and enslavement of people. So what we have now, or the way things are right now, is to do with that. So equitable access would be rebalancing that debt that is owed to those communities who things were taken from, people were taken from, but continues to do the same thing. But it's also, equitable wealth is kind of like changing the valuing system of the capitalist valuing of system of things as well. And for me, and I think you've mentioned it there, it's kind of moving away from expecting and seeing things from kind of not just a whiteness perspective or white perspective or colonial. It's seeing things excluding, moving away those barriers. So whether it's because most of the communities we work with whereas the Racial Justice Network, we kind of say 80% of our work, 90% of our work is with Black and Brown or racialized communities, some of whom are going through the asylum system, some of whom have migrated, some of whom have been born and bred here, multiple generations, but still experiencing the disadvantages that come with, anti-Blackness, other things. So for me, the equitable access is, so when people are applying for funding, for example, to do work, people are approaching or even seeking employment, people are going through the criminal justice system, the disadvantages that they face because of that, it's kind of removing all of those. But also for system to understand that expectation to oversimplify issues, that expectation to present things to a system that only sees things from one way. So it's kind of changing all of that, and the hierarchy of knowledges, for example, the honoring of lived experience, but also lived experience expertise, because we still see day and time where, for example, when you're asking people from certain communities to come in and share perspectives or come in and do it for free, but then we honor, I don't know, people with multiple degrees, we honor people who are professionals. So it's kind of all of that rebalancing and turning things upside down that I see and understand is, and that whole idea of saving communities, because with that, the way we see and understand resources or understand those who have, they come to those communities almost as saving them, as opposed to actually, which again, going back to the rebalancing. So for me, equitable access means all of those things.
Thank you so much, Penny. I'm going to just slide over to Esther with the same question. If you can hear us, Esther. Yeah.
Yes,
great.
I can. Yes, I can. Thank you to Decolonising Economics and Gapi, for inviting me to also participate today in this session. So for me, in terms of equitable access to wealth and other aspects such as a world that has committed reparations, as a reparationist, what I'm involved in, working with others locally, nationally and internationally, is really looking at the systemic change that needs to happen in terms of what we refer to as a post-reparations world global order. And what that looks like is a repaired relationship between within communities that have been historically oppressed and dispossessed in terms of colonization, enslavement, imperialism, etc. And also looking at then the relationship between us and other members of the human family. So that rebalancing, as Penny has already mentioned, would need to be a part of it. And for us, we also recognize that this has a material basis. So it's not just about the interpersonal dimensions, but the structural and material basis of reordering our home in terms of economy, you know, the management of our home, which is looking at the relationships that we need to reconstruct, also with our Mother Earth. Yeah, that would be a key part of a post-reparations global order. And as a reparationist, where we link notions of cognitive justice, climate justice, and reparatory justice, I'm involved in promoting the notion of planet repairs. And this basically refers to the need for us as humans to proceed from the standpoint of pluriversality that highlights this nexus between cognitive, environmental, climate, and also reparatory justice. And the fact that we have to repair holistically our relationship with and inseparability from Earth, environment, the pluriverse, okay? And that means giving due recognition to indigenous knowledges of the first peoples of the planet, in contrast with Western centric Enlightenment ideals that separated humanity from nature and devalorized indigenous knowledge systems in order to justify exploitation, extractivism, and capitalist accumulation, and also privatization of the commons. So it would look like a recommoning. Communities, what's been referred to as intercommunalism. So not these big nations, but really communities that reform themselves. And we sort of, you know, redirect the resources of our home, our economy globally towards the development of peoples. And we refer to that process as winning what we refer to as Ubuntu Dunia, which is a multipolar world of global justice where different peoples of different racial backgrounds who are also decolonizing, reclaiming land, reclaiming their identities, reclaiming their knowledges as part of their own process of internal self-liberation as a group. But then those groups not doing those processes kind of by themselves, recognizing the notion of Ubuntu coming from the Bantu-speaking peoples of Southern Africa, that our humanity is best expressed in terms of how we relate to others. So, you know, moving to forms of Ubuntu collectively, and a big part of that Ubuntu world would be a repaired Africa, which is the source of all human beings, but many of us more directly identify as African. And we're saying that Africa, which really feeds the world, which is still very much being exploited, the extractivism that is taking place, that's where there needs to be a reordering beyond those colonial borders that are responsible for causing so much strife. You know, continuation of civil conflicts based on separating indigenous African ethnicity and nationality from each other. And that repaired Africa is called Ma'at Ubuntu Man. And that's an alternative, it's really a union, a Pan-African union of communities based on the best of our African value systems of Ma'at and Ubuntu. So a state that is based on Mat Ubuntu, and also the Ubuntufication actually of the world. That's what it would look like for me.
That was, you got so much, yeah, so many double hands up for that in the chat box, and so clear and concise, and yeah, I can really feel that presence in the way that you've described it, Esther. Thank you so much. And Yvonne, you and I've had some conversations similar to this around questions around wealth and our experiences of wealth and what that means at a bodily level. And I really wanted you to share for you as well your reflections on this and how it would feel to live in a world of reparations.
So I just want to say thanks to Esther and Penny. I mean, I've said that you've said just about everything. I'm going to see what else I could add to that. I just want to say, give a big shout out to Nonny and the Barrett. I mean, it's cool. So I just like to pick up from what Esther and Penny has said. And I'm just going to start with a quote from James Baldwin. And for me, we're talking about what reparation looks like. And what James Baldwin said, he said, we picked the cotton, we carried it to the market, and we build the railroads under someone else's whip for nothing, for absolutely nothing. And for me, if we talk about reparation, that is where we need to start from. For me, that is a starting point. And then we speak about reparation, yes, we're speaking about repairing the breach. And if we talk about repairing the breach, it means that you put us back into the position that we would have been had we not had to take cottons for other people, had we not had to build railroads for other people and get absolutely nothing. And what does that look like? That is holistic. You know, Penny and Esther touch on it. It's about economics, like we've had these discussions about economic liberation. It's about educational liberation. And crucially, it's about, I'm from Jamaica, and Bob Marley puts it clearly when he says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. It's about collectively emancipating ourselves from these ideology, you know, that has permeates our society, that has taught us that we are less than because of the way we look, has taught us that we are lazy, even though we are the ones who build, you know, like this Britain, we are the one who build the NHS? We are the one who build the health service. We're the one who build the railroads, but we're taught that we're lazy. We're told that we're lazy. And it's about, you know, decolonizing our mind from that and boldly stand and say, we are the people who we have built this place and what it is that we want. No, we're entitled to it. It's not as if we're asking for crumbs from the table because, you know, you give us a few places at your university and, you know, there's one person who might sit on a chair, you know, the chair of tokenistic, the chair of some place, I don't even know, some bank. That is not reparative justice. As I say, reparative justice is putting us back where we would have been had not you taken us from where we were. And it's also looking about the prison system, how most of the people in the prison system are young Black men. And I'm just going to talk about this because this is close to my heart, about particularly how, you know, Black men are profiled. So first of all, you know, young people go to school at nursery level, they are deemed as disruptive. So that's them being branded as disruptive already. By the time they get to primary school, they are being taught they have to sit out in detention. By the time they get to high school, you know, they are being branded as all sorts. And it's a trap. So sooner or later, at the end of that, by the time you reach 18, it's either you end up in the prison system or you end up in the psychiatric wing. So when we talk about reparative justice, is making sure that our people, this is not the part, you know, the default part for our people, where we have to work extra hard to ensure that we do not end up in those traps. It's ensuring that we have security. It's ensuring that there's an environment that is conducive for us as a community to thrive, for us as a community to practice our cultural beliefs, for us as a community to grow together and, you know, just to thrive and just to be the best that we can be. And like we spoke about economic, and, you know, I've been looking at economic liberation recently. We've been looking at that together. And one of the things I've come to notice is that for us, our community, we have been, a lot of the things that we have done, like we spoke about partner and a lot of things, you know, that our people have been using outside of the mainstream capitalistic structure. Like I told you, Esther, about like my grandmother, she came here on the banana boat, but when she came, there were signs that to say no dogs, no Blacks, no dogs, no Irish, no Blacks, and nobody would rent them anywhere. And what they did, they all come together and somebody got like one room and they all live together in that one room, and they all put their money together and they purchase a property. And when they purchased that property, all the people came and lived. And my grandmother spent probably like lived in England, probably, I don't know if it was like 10 years, but it wasn't that long. It's either 10 years or shorter than 10 years. And when she died and she left about 4 properties. And that generation, they understood the concept of wealth generation, and they understood the concept of reparative justice, because reparative justice is not about one generation. Reparative justice is sustainable. And in order to sustain a community, when the new generation comes, they need to have something to fall on. It's not about starting again from the beginning. And reparative justice is ensuring that those structures are in place and we are able to develop those structures. We are able to build those structures so that our young people, the next generation coming in, they don't have to start from the beginning, and at least they are confident and they are comfortable and they are secure in knowing that, you know, we don't have to start like from the beginning. So I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks. I'm actually what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna join the last 2 questions together, and I'm gonna start back with you as well, because I want to give some time to, got some good questions in the chat, and I hope that we can get some space for them too. So Yvonne, you're based up in Glasgow, and More are currently doing a bunch of very exciting organising around the COP later this year. So I'm interested to know a bit about how climate justice, how you see reparations as part of a climate justice solution. And for you, Yvonne, I particularly want you to talk about your visions for housing work in Jamaica, but also a bit about how reparations informs the culture of organising, both within More and other groups that you work with. And I'll ask the same question to Penny and Esther, and I'll pass it on in a second, but maybe just for you to like have that space to talk about the culture of organising as well as the focus on climate justice and reparation.
So for us, we are a migrant-led grassroots organisation in Glasgow, and we campaign for asylum seekers' access to employment, education, decent housing, and to be treated with dignity. So for people who might not know, Glasgow is a dispersal city for asylum-seeking families, and when it's a dispersal city, it means that all the people, or most of the people from England or people wherever in the UK that are seeking international protection, they are sent to Glasgow. So they are lumped into Glasgow. The housing conditions, they normally are placed in housing that are... So initially, when Glasgow became a dispersal city, the houses that were dedicated and were used for asylum seeking families were houses that were earmarked as not good enough for families in Glasgow. So those houses were going to be destroyed. So just for you to get the context, the houses that people are placed into with their family. However, there's been quite a lot of resistance in Glasgow. There's been quite a lot of support around the refugee community. And one of it, even though a lot of us, some of the organizing is migrant-led, one of the things is that I have personally noticed is that for us as a community, we are commercialized. So the moment you come as an asylum seeker, then the housing provider is paid, the interpreter is paid to interpret for you. Even though you speak English clearly and you can articulate what you have to say, then you have the refugee-led communities who are paid to say, I think Penny alluded to that earlier, they are paid to say what you have to say because they can say it better than you. So for me, it's an industry. So even though I live here, and even though it is my home, I'm mindful of the factors around it, that I am merely a commodity. So I'm a commodity for the housing provider, I'm a commodity for the solicitor, I'm a commodity for every single person. Just like James Baldwin said, it's just that I'm not carrying the cotton, I'm commodified in other ways. So what we've done, we've been doing quite a lot of migrant-led organizing, and we've been doing organizing around climate, migrant justice is climate justice. And what we are doing, we're making the connections with climate justice and migrant justice. And not just the connection is that climate justice is migrant justice, and making the connections with the colonial history of climate justice. We're making the connections with the fact that climate justice, it impacts people of color or people in the global south disproportionately. And not only that, but also people from the global south who resides here. And one impact is that of the asylum seeking community. Because even though we live in Glasgow, as I just explained, that the houses that we were given at first were houses that were here marked as uninhabitable for people who live in Glasgow, but that is the houses that we were given. Not only that we were given to, the city council made an enormous amount of money from that. Now the contract is no longer with the city council. You have private companies who are making an enormous amount of money on the back of that. In addition to the fact that people who live here, how it is that we're being affected, there's one example that I'll speak about is in Glasgow. I don't think there's any other place in the city or in the United Kingdom that this is. There's a baby mother unit in Glasgow where mayors, who's a housing contract, the housing provider, decided that mothers should not reside in the community. That's mayors and the Home Office. Sorry, my hay fever, so that's why I'm doing my nose like this. They decided that mothers should not live in the communities. So what they have done, they have removed the mothers and their babies and put them into a building that was used to house single young people who are transitioning from youth to adulthood. So this is one small room. It's not even a house. It's a tiny room. It's the equivalent of even open prison cells are larger than that. And this is where mothers and babies have to live until the baby is 2 years old. And when we speak about climate justice, and we make the connection with migrant justice, is how we make the connection to show the correlation that the old, I won't even say the old, because if I say the old, it sounds too abstract, is that how colonialism manifests itself, because it depends on how people look, then people are treated worse off. A lot of people who seeks refuge, they are impacted by policies of the West. They are impacted by policies. It's either they're fleeing because there's drought in their country. It's either they're fleeing because there's war. It's either they're fleeing for whatever they're fleeing from. It's an impact from colonialism. And when people arrive in a country where you're meant to be safe, you're then placed, you're given the worst accommodation. Not only that you're given the worst accommodation, you're given £5 a day. That is what you're meant to live on. During the pandemic, a lot of people in Glasgow were removed from their homes and they were taken to hotels. When they were in the hotels, they weren't given the £5 subsidy, the £5 subsidy that they were given by the Home Office. That was being removed because that was given to the hotel provider to provide food. So people had to eat whatever was given to them. So again, it comes back to how, like for us, it's about how we become a property, a commodity. So you're not good enough to spend the money to buy your own food. Somebody else who doesn't even, the food is not even culturally appropriate, but that is the person who purchased the food for you. And for some people, it might seem, people might think, but how does this connect to climate justice? It's not necessarily, climate justice it's not necessarily about the direct impact, it's the indirect impact also. So we speak about environmental justice, and that is how we are doing our organizing around it, to make the connection so people recognize that this is about environmental injustice.
Thank you so much.
That was clear.
That was good. And also, if you stay kind of like, if you follow More on Twitter, they've got some really exciting plans in the next few months. So I just suggest that you, really like follow the, what do you call it? The handle. Okay, so I'm gonna just, invite Penny and maybe Penny first and then Esther. And both of you, because Esther, you spoke a little bit about the climate justice connections, to speak a little bit to the kind of how reparations focuses on the culture of organising, and maybe speak a bit about the 1st of August as well. So Penny, do you want to go first, and then Esther can follow?
Yeah, thank you. I think the way Yvonne has responded to that question is probably also spoken to a lot of what I'd noted down as well, as in terms of the kind of how climate justice could contribute or should contribute to kind of reparations. I really like the idea of migrant justice is kind of climate justice. We say same thing to racial justice being climate justice, but also a line that we've used quite a lot is social justice, and all the other elements as well. And I think this connects also to the previous point around really understanding positionalities and having an intersectional approach. I've kind of seen some of the questions there, because having an intersectional approach allows for us to really understand the multiple oppressions and how they sit on top or layer on top of each other. We launched, as in terms of just a way forward and how to do it, we have got what started off as a campaign, but now is really a framework of thinking and doing climate justice. We're calling the 13th recommendation. And this was something we launched in Leeds, on the back of the Leeds Climate Commission really not having the perspectives that catered for all of what we bring in. And what Yvonne was saying there about really not seeing how interconnected everything is. So from forced displacements to, as you say, foreign policy, to the criminal justice system, to kind of the xenophobia and everything else, how everything is interconnected. So there is no way of doing climate as if it's a single issue, or if anybody attempting to do it as a single issue is doing a disservice, not just to the planet, but to everything else that's connected around it, which is why they're going back to the colonial, understanding colonial legacies. So what we launched was a way to see, understand the interconnectedness and kind of 3 tenets. And one of the tenets is colonial legacies. The second one is internationalism. And the third one is around solidarity and activist solidarity, because as you know, obviously there is what we see here, but there is also what's happening to our brothers and sisters in the global south, but all over the world, in terms of even when you're trying to protect the land from the corporations, from the leaders in the country who are also still suffering that poison of kind of coloniality, and what that means. So there is no way of fighting and sorting out climate from a individual, local, region perspective. It needs to broaden out, and any work that's being done has to do that too. And for us to launch this, because Leeds Climate Commission, the 12 recommendations that they had no internationalism, had nothing to do with colonial legacies, but also it's kind of pushing and driving this perspective of the climate solutions, also not just reinforcing capitalism, but they're also coming at a cost to the global south. So when you're talking about cleaner air, when you're talking about, and also the urgency now, I think for me, I still honor people like Wangari Maathai, who were saying this decades ago, ignored. A lot of the people who've done this and spoken about this even more recently ignored, but it's only when it started to impact on the West that we see this urgency crisis, as we call it. Again, ignoring and invisibilizing not just the people who are out there who've been kicking off about this and asking all this, but also the knowledges that are being held by the people who are also at the forefront, people who have the least resources. So we're still going that concept of going to teach, going to tell. So the way to do this in terms of acknowledging these 3 tenets for us within it, and I'll put the link here because I can't kind of speak to it all. I'm conscious and looking at time as well. But the way to do it is kind of, as I say about the solutions, it's still coming from, if we're talking electric cars, it's more children being taken down or having to go down the mines in the Congo. It's more people being kind of abused as a result. It's all of those things, whether it's technology kind of that we're moving towards, it's coming at a cost, and that needs to stop, or people who are pushing for it to acknowledge that and go back to what we're talking about before around the debt and the climate debt. And in terms of how the relationship rooted around racial justice should look like, for me, it's it decenters whiteness, it decenters colonial kind of concepts and ways of doing things, but it also centers, at the same time, was centering the most marginalized groups, because those were the ones who kind of still left on the margins, as Yvonne nicely put it, about not just commodification, but if we center the most marginalized, you're not leaving anybody behind, whether it's classism, whether it's gender, sexism, ableism, all of those things, or disability, you center those communities and you work your way outwards. And in terms of acknowledging the traumas and the harms that have been done, for me, work that speaks to that, honors all of those things, also acknowledges and celebrates difference, because it's that whole idea of integration or be like us, or kind of why communities continue to kind of almost white themselves, to kind of align themselves with whiteness, is because there is financial benefit, there is hierarchy, there's something like that. So decentering all of that, but celebrating difference and acknowledging it, whatever that is, for me is kind of how I see it. And I think for the work that we've done, that's what I've seen. That's what I feel like the repair and the acknowledgement, whether it's the spaces that we hold that honor some of that. I've seen that's something that really honors, but also stays true and radical to the communities that we're serving, or we've kind of who we're doing what we're doing for.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Penny. And Esther, over to you, just to give us some insights. There's a long legacy around reparations that is celebrated. And yeah, we'd just love you to share a bit about that and the relationships between climate justice.
Sure. So in terms of the relationship with climate justice, the work I do as a reparationist is just so connected, because essentially we have to look at what has brought us to this point that we are now at, as members of the human family of climate and ecological crisis emergency, and the massive dispossessions and harm that has been caused not only to ourselves but to our relationship to Mother Earth that sustains all our lives. And that is obviously rooted in colonization. So the struggle for reparations in its true sense of repairing harm, and also the notion of reparations in international law, tells us that we cannot effectively repair harm that is still continuing. So we have to stop that harm first. The harm that is happening on our watch. We know what happened to our foreparents during colonization, but this stuff has been intensified in our lifetimes. So that's our responsibility to fix. And so stopping the harm and ensuring then that there are guarantees of non-repetition, which is one of the principles of reparations under international law that gets the least emphasized. How do we ensure that our repair process and the solutions that are being offered, as Penny has alluded to, don't end up creating other harms that other people in a time to come are going to have to now correct our mistakes. So it has to be total. It has to be radical in the sense of going to the root cause of what some of us refer to in the Kiswahili tongue as the maangamizi. And so part of what has already been recognized in the narrow field of what a lot of people now organizing around climate justice advocate for is a restoration of lands and a recognition of indigenous knowledge systems, because indigenous people, African people, mothers and fathers of human civilization, have long known how to interact with each other, how to live in a way that was not based on extractivism and capitalism and exploitation and privatization. And that was severely interrupted with colonization. So anti-colonial struggles and now the struggle to defeat neo-colonialism, which is this global system, apart from white supremacy, that is impacting on all of us today. And that's how many of us are relating to it, because we don't have time, as also has been pointed out, about the single issue and saying, oh no, because today we're using particular language, that, oh, we're focusing on just climate justice or economic justice or some other type. No, it has to be all of it together. And we carry within us the memories, the legacies, the knowledges, the actions of all those that have gone before us. And we have to draw down into the wellspring of our collective and genetic memories in order to figure out where we're going from here. That being said, the work that is happening, there's a lot of stuff happening that's bringing all these movements together. And in fact, the very campaign that I'm part of, Stop the Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide Ecocide campaign, was set up to do that, in terms of linking these issues, or all these wide movements that were often seen as separate and disconnected into one, and also one of those campaigns that has directly seen that part of the harm to us as a result of enslavement, colonization, and neo-colonialism is the destruction of the earth, the environment. And so that's why we're against ecocide. And we know the connections between genocide and ecocide. They both go together, okay? And part of what we do then is that's why we work as part of the Extinction Rebellion in terms of leading the Internationalist Solidarity Network, which is not having groups join XR in the Global South. These are groups who are affinity networks, because what we're arguing is there needs to be a merging of rebellions in the sense of our people have been in rebellion for centuries, trying to reassert their vicegerency over planet Earth, okay? And that is still being denied, okay? Through colonization directly and neo-colonialism. So we work with these communities to support them in their continued struggles for liberation. So for me as an African person, the struggle for African liberation is connected to the struggle to defend life on earth, you know, to reclaim the commons in terms of land, to build communities. And it's all comes together for us concretely. We're supporting as the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, a legal action and extra legal campaign of young people in a case called the Global Majority versus the UK government. That is 3 young co-claimants who are living in the UK, but who have roots outside in the Global South, who are seeking to hold the government to account for their failures to implement the Paris Agreement, and making the argument that Britain's actions here are causing genocide to our family members and ecocide around the world, and that the resources that must be redirected towards our own repair and building the institutions that we need, resourcing the repair you know, solutions that we are working on. And part of how we discuss this and we try and bring all of this together in a way with other people is the 1st of August, which we refer to as Mosiah, after Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and we do a Pan-African reparations event, protest event, which is not just protesting against what we don't want, but it's also looking at the new world that we have to build. And this was a march that took place in between 2014 and 19. But in last year, we declared a Pan-African reparations rebellion on what's known as Afrikan Emancipation Day, the 1st of Mosiah. And we declared this rebellion because we're saying to our people, and we're asking others to join us, we can no longer be complicit in this current status quo. Yeah, wherever we are, we're all part of it now. And so we now, for our own survival and those of our family members and our communities, have to, you know, do something different. And so that's why our theme, we have a theme every year. This year it is defeating the Maangamizi of neo-colonialism with African autonomy, which is connected to sovereignty, the restoration of sovereignty, which we know is something that many peoples are also organizing towards, including indigenous peoples of the earth, peoples in Abya Yala in particular. But we defeat Maangamizi not only with autonomy, but we're saying all roads must lead to our sacred cause of reparations. So that means all those people who are struggling to transform our world and build a new one, none of us can do it by ourselves. Just like the climate and ecological crisis is not just going to affect one group of people, it's affecting all of us. So we're saying this is so big that we cannot achieve it as human beings unless we unify our actions and our struggles for transformation. And so in that vein, we do invite others to join with us as we commemorate our resistance, our rebellion to build a new world, And one of the things that we're advocating is non-territorial autonomy, because we need to have access to land. We need to be able to grow our own foods. We need to be able to build communities and institutions so that we can carry on our culture. And we need to be connected to earth instead of just being put in all these concrete jungles. The book, Who Owns Britain, told us that, you know, literally at the time it was 59 million people in the UK living on 10% of the landmass. So all that other land that has been, you know, taken away from the ordinary people is what we should be having access to, so that we would end a lot of these problems of violence, structural violence that happen in inner city areas because of overcrowding, you know, not enough access to housing, green spaces, and all of the environmental dimensions of gun and knife crime and other types of violence that we are seeing. That's me.
Thank you so much, Esther. That's so great. And also, so I'm just going to, transparency, we're going to go for another like 5 to 8 minutes. We did start a bit late. And if you are unable to stay, don't worry, because at some point we'll share the recording and the transcripts. So feel free to jot out if you need to. I think what you've offered, each of you have offered us, is a real like concrete picture to the strategies that are required for reparations to exist. And that I feel recently the word has been bandied around quite a lot with often not much depth to it. And just to kind of understand the sort of small complexities that exist, the nuances and the complexities that do exist, even within this very short conversation. But I'm really grateful for just how much clarity you've brought to that from the last hour. There was a very important question, which I think, well, firstly, beautifully leads us into inviting you all to our next conversation on disability justice, which will be on the 21st of July. But as all of you have said, there's not really a very good way to singularly focus on one conversation. Like the conversations around climate justice, reparations, racial justice, building an economic democracy, disability justice, and gender justice lay within each other. So whilst we have had a focus on each conversation, we do want to make sure that we are showing you how and why these interlinkages are so important, which is why we've chosen this kind of collective series of conversations. But the question that, and I'm just going to kind of scroll back, basically I think, Silon, you've really described it wonderfully well. And if you want to scroll back in the chat, I think at about 140 in the chat, the question asks, you know, what is the work that we're doing without, you know, if we're not thinking about ableism and how disability justice is so central to our work. I suppose specifically thinking about the way in which our bodies are made to act within a kind of extractive and capitalist system, and what it is that we need our bodies to be enabled to do in a world in which reparations exist. And so if each of you could maybe close up by speaking a bit to what a reparations world would look like when disability justice is centered in that work, and how you maybe bring that about in the organizing work that you do. And maybe I'll ask Penny to go first, and then Esther, and then end on Yvonne.
Yeah, thank you, Suleiman, for the question. Yeah, I think when I saw it, I thought about was similar to what I was saying about intersectional approach, because what we have seen time and time again is not just what, I think Esther's described it as well around the whataboutism. Like it's almost like we only have capacity to focus on one, and I totally agree in terms of the exclusion, not just in the space, physically in spaces, but also the exclusion in terms of knowledges and everything else that comes with communities who are, and for me, I'd go back to what I'd said before around kind of centering people, the people who are most marginalized, but being led by as well. And I think this is the approach we've taken at the Racial Justice Network, of the work, not necessarily, yes, learned experiences, great, lived experiences, even greater, and or combination of, and it's not just saying we'll take an approach, it's actually acting upon it. And I know, for instance, we held there's a project we call Collective Conversations within RGN, and this was opening spaces to bring in all those other perspectives that are often considered as one or either. So we were talking about, for example, race and sexuality, race and gender, race and class, race and disability. And this was also an opportunity for the communities or the work that's done, for example, in inviting people who are doing stuff around disability to come and hear what it means for communities who are racialized, as well as communities. And I think that learning and that deepening of learning, for me, I'm still learning a lot in a lot of the work that we do. I think it needs to happen, and people with opportunities and platforms to offer those and open those doors as well, because I think we don't know everything, but there's definitely, if there's a willingness and a commitment to ensure that we're not excluding anybody, we also need to kind of live by those standards, as opposed to, oh, because I am this sort of marginalized, I haven't got capacity to honor or to create space. I think we need to do it. And for me, that's still reparatory in terms of what that brings in a room. I'm trying to be quick as well, but yeah, I'll pass it on to somebody else.
Thank you so much, Penny. Esther, yes.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for the question, Suleiman. Really important question. And I guess my response to it is in thinking about the work that I'm involved in. So we was talking about what happens on the 1st of Mosiah, otherwise known as August. And as part of our reparations process, we have all, from the time that we had a march that began in 2014, we've always had disabled people who would see themselves as part of disabled communities, as well as African heritage communities, participate, attend our activities, always. And it goes beyond just participation and, you know, having involvement in stuff. It's also about recognizing that as a reparations movement, if I can use that term in a singular sense, has to also acknowledge and acknowledge more the debts that we owe to other movements that make up part of what we are. And one of the key, for instance, slogans that we utilize, that I've seen different African communities utilize, is that one about nothing about us without us, which we know very much came out of the disability rights movement, but a lot of people may not know that. So it is about the learning that we do within movements, but also between movements. But taking the point that Penny has already raised about the learning is about also recognizing the leadership and where it's coming from, and finding ways in which we can see this current crescendo of movements, that reparations is really about a movement of movements. And so it is about how can we work together to ensure that this notion of, okay, we know what we don't want, but we're now all part of building the new, that it doesn't end up having inbuilt within it those oppressions of the old world. And that requires reflective practice, and it requires us to each be holding each other to account and raising those voices as part of being the change. I'll admit it's not easy. It's not easy, because I've been in spaces where there is, an attempt to silence particular voices because it's, oh, that's not important. That's the secondary issue. But we all have to struggle, I think, to do better around that. So that's what I would say. And certainly it's something that I'm going to be taking back into the various organizations and movements that I'm part of, as another aspect that we need to be always thinking about in what we're proposing. But that's why I guess we're advocating one of the concrete goals that we're organizing towards, and why we still do what we do on the 1st of Mosiah, is that we're calling for an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice. And that is really about the right for our people to be heard on this question of reparations, and to elevate the solutions that they are working on. So there is one concrete way that we can ensure that there is evidence given, testimony given, okay, at this future hearing that is going to take place around the question of the intersectional dimensions, looking at disability rights, other aspects of intersectionality. And that is an invitation that I'm also throwing out, because we are, you know, not waiting for the state to do this. We're going to do this ourselves, okay? And through bringing people together in a Ubuntu sense, then we know that we are powerful enough to actually force those changes in the wider society and also internationally.
Thanks so much, Esther. That's so great. And I'm going to pass to Yvonne. Final word, Yvonne. And then I'm going to, Noni's going to close up.
Thanks for the question. I was just looking to see who was the person who asked a question. That's what I was looking at.
Of course, yeah.
I because there's so many things, so many questions I can't see. So the work that we do and the way we approach our work, we do co-creation. So for, you know, we spoke about intersectionality. We speak about intersectionality in relation to the intersecting injustices. But for us, we speak about intersectionality also in relation to co-creation, in relation to the solutions. And for us, this disability movement, gender-based movement, we're a migrant-led organization. We are a migrant-led organization. We are people of color organization. So all those injustices that intersect, but while it's the injustices intersect, it puts us in a unique position because it gives us opportunity to co-create. It gives us opportunity to create the solutions and take them to the parliaments and invite the people who need to hear what we're saying. So that is embedded in our work that we do. So our work is based on, for us, the outcome is based on equity. The work that we do is based on equity. The solution is based on equity. So it takes into account all the marginalized groups and all the solutions. As I say, for us, the crucial thing is about co-creation. And co-creation is working together. Co-creation is understanding communities, engaging with different communities. And engagement is not just a one-off, even you have somewhere here or there. Engagement is going into the community, getting to know people, having ongoing dialogue. And that is how we are able to incorporate disability movements, LGBT movements, all those movements into our migrant-led organization. So for us, as I say, it's about, you know, somebody spoke about the knowledge base. So it's about people bringing the knowledge and we work together. We co-create, so it's we create the solutions together. Because there's, as much as I'm a Black woman, there are many things that I wouldn't know about a disability movement unless we have people within our organization. There's many things I wouldn't know about the LGBT movement. The only way I know about the LGBT movement is because in our group, we have people from the LGBT community, and we recognize that, you know, like Dr. King says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And for us, injustice it's not an individual concept. It's not that it impacts me and it doesn't, or it impacts somebody from the LGBTQ community and doesn't impact somebody who's not from the LGBT communities. All of us are impacted. So all of us work together. All of us work together on the solutions. And it is only that way then we can envision a world where all of us, a world that's an equity, a world where all of us can coexist, where all of us can thrive, a world that is based on equity. So that is my response to the question.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thank you so much for bringing that important word, equity, and just how central equity and justice are in our organising work, and just a really beautiful vision for going forward. We're ending here, everyone. I'm just going to give Noni the last word. Thank you so much to our speakers. And yeah, if you followed the social media, there's lots of kind of retweeting of the magic that has been shared and the wisdom that's been shared. So you can run back through our social media through that. And Noni, just passing to you to close up.
Thanks everyone. That was just amazing. One, a panel of just aunties that I love. It's just, I know it's going to be a great time. So I'll just say that. So one thing that I wanted to say to remind you all is, so from today we've decided that we're going on to the Reparations Day March. So if you would like to come with, we'll send you an email following the event of how you can find out about where to meet and stuff on the day. And another thing, we've got 2 events coming up. So the first one we have is the Queerness and the Economy, which will be next Thursday, next one of those days. It's on Ola will post the link, and we'll be talking about how queerness is linked to the ways in which capitalism has been developed. So that's one thing. And then the next one will be and our final one is the disability and care event that we're doing. And we'll be doing that with the Triple Cripples, who are a great duo who do really amazing work around like around disability justice. Last thing is, so we're doing all these events to raise money for our crowdfunder, which is helping to invest in the future of BPOC-led cooperatives. If you haven't donated, please donate. If you haven't shared, please share. We've also added some really cool incentives that you can get when you donate. So like pottery or a tarot reading, a DJ playlist, lots of cute little pickling session as well. So if you can look for that on our crowdfunder and just learn a bit more about how to do that. And lastly, if you haven't, sign up to our newsletter for updates, because, you know, we're serious now. We do newsletter quarterly updates. Those are the people we are now. So please just, sign up to that. I know that's a lot of different asks, but all of this will be on our social media, and this event was recorded, so you can rewatch this great time we've had together again and again and again if you're into that type of thing. So finally, let's do a round of applause to our speakers, and thank you so much everyone, and thanks Guppy for great chairing as well, and thanks Ola and Sophie for great tech support as well. So thanks, bye everyone.
Cheers all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.